I'm really looking forward to today.
Me as well.
Do you recognize some of the cubes here on the screen? Are these some of your peeps?
I have not looked yet. I'm looking now. I recognize some of these faces and some of these names.
So you're gonna, this will be kind of a friend roundup, and you're gonna make some new friends, the friend collector. Yay. All right, let's get going. Welcome to Futures Friday. My name is Rebecca Ryan. As you may know, on most Fridays, we bring folks together and we talk about the future. We use a technique, we might do a signals panel, on and on it goes. Last month in February, we did a special series on navigating the messy middle. What does this mean? It means that we're in a time period where some systems are dying and some systems are emerging. And we as entrepreneurial community builders and change makers, we've got to figure out how to sort of jump from one to the other. So that's what all of February was dedicated to. And when I found out that my friend Gregg Potter's new book, Collaborate, was coming out, I thought, oh my God, it's not called Collaborate. It's about collaboration. The book is called Gregg Potter, you fool. But it is all about collaboration. And he's been teaching me about collaboration without a book for all these years. So Gregg is pre-selling his book right now. I wanted to do him a mitzvah and give him an opportunity to come on, maybe make some new fans, but also to help us, as you probably remember, if you were paying attention to the Navigating the Messy Middle series in February, step 2 is to build your team. And teams and collaborations are at the heart of Gregg's work. So a quick word about Gregg before we jump into it. He's the CEO of Project Kinect, and that is spelled Kinect. He has his master's from the Clinton School. He worked at the UN. He was called the King of Awkward by one of his drama teachers at UNLV. He's the regional field director of South Africa for Peacework International. So we are so happy to A, have Gregg in our universe, but B, to be able to share him with our Futures Friday network today. Gregg, welcome to Futures Friday.
Thank you so much. Hello, everyone, and happy, beautiful Friday. For anyone who's in the Midwest right now, it's warming up and the snow is melting.
I take personal responsibility for that. My birthday was last week, and I was like, last week in the Midwest felt like the week that it was like, spring was like, I see you. I might be headed your way. And Gregg, your birthday is coming up in just a couple days.
It is, yes.
Pisces
Unite.
Pisces Unite. Okay, fishes, here we go. These two crazy creative fishes are going to talk a little bit today about collaboration. So Gregg, one of the things that has always struck me about your work in collaboration is that you have said, and once you said it, I was like, oh my God, this is true. You said, nobody really knows what collaboration is. It's like a word we use all the time, but people are terrible at it. So how do you pronounce, or how do you define collaboration, or pronounce it? I don't know, pronounce it, whatever you want to do.
Collaboration. I look at collaboration very simply as two or more people, two or more entities, two or more actors working on a common goal. So it can be musicians collaborating on a song. It can, it can be what I often use in my facilitation work, in my workshop, and bring it up in the book quite often, is the grocery store checkout line. It's an unintentional collaboration, but everyone's there to do the same, to get through the same work.
Now, let's stop there, because I think you have just drawn a really important line in the sand, and I'm going to encourage our participants here to think about this. How many collaborations are intentional versus unintentional, right? I mean, because it was recently my birthday. I'm not soliciting cupcakes, but my address is. No, but I during my birthday, I always like take a step back and I reflect. And I think about, okay, what do I want this year to be like? Or where am I at my life stage? What, I mean, I'm halfway through my life at this point, maybe more than halfway through my life. But it's this time to step back. And of course, the thing that I often think about is, who do I want to collaborate with? But those are intentional collaborations, right? That's me reaching out to you saying, do you want to come on Futures Friday? But this notion of the grocery store checkout line, we do this kind of crap every week. Well, maybe every 2 weeks now if you're in lockdown. So can you talk with us about why the grocery store checkout line and what these unintentional collaborations teach us about what collaboration actually is?
Yeah, definitely. Well, first of all, with the grocery store checkout line, it's such a universal example that we've all, I mean, everyone on this planet, no matter where I've worked in this globe, everyone has been through some sort of checkout line. And so it's very, the fact that it's universal, it's easy to dissect into roles, into language, into common goals. And my favorite thing about that is like the ending, because a lot of times, and we'll probably get into this in a little bit, just like we sometimes we're in collaborations in intentional collaborations, and we don't know when to end. And so like in the grocery store checkout line, it would look silly if you just stood there with your change looking at the cashier. But that's also, I use that example also to look at how much we are collaborating. It's noon, and today I've collaborated with probably over 20 people, beside between going to spin, going to get my coffee, talking to my mother, working on plans for this weekend. You know, those are all unintentional collaborations that we can easily take lessons from to look at how we create intentional collaborations.
Yeah, that idea of the end, like the checkout line does have such a clear end, right? Like you get handed your receipt, or you get asked if you want your receipt, and you move along, right? You end that. But at work, I think about those committees that never end, right?
Right.
I'm thinking of like the office and like the party planning committee that was always planning a party, and they always seemed like they kind of hated being together. And how do you end it? So let's break this apart. It sounds to me like collaborations have beginnings, middles, and ends. You talked about rules, relationships, common goals. So if you were going to do the anatomy, or if you were going to dissect what a collaboration is, what do you think are the most vital parts of it? And if you want to, or I'll bring us back to this, is where do we get these wrong? Like, where do these run off the rails?
Well, I love that question. And last Friday with Yaz, I believe Yaz went into about like deciding whether or not to collaborate. I think that's the most important piece of this, because a lot of times we look at like what is the project and or what is the goal, and sometimes we can just do it ourselves, or sometimes we can easily just, we already have it going and we can piggyback off that. So analyzing and assessing whether this is something that to turn into an intentional collaboration is very important. And then immediately following that is looking at what roles are needed and how do you fill those roles.
Sorry, amigo, are there standard rules that every collaboration has? I mean, I love that you said, do you even need a collaborator, or can you just do this by yourself? Because sometimes adding a collaborator, I mean, it's like packing a child to go to the park. It's like, why are we even doing this? You are a pain in my ass. You could just, I think every woman has had the feeling, if she's been responsible for anything in the household, I'll just do it myself, right? But so the question about when to choose a collaborator, do you have any guidance around when to choose one and what kind of collaborator to choose? We talked during the February series about whole brain teams. The idea that if you're trying to do something visionary, don't just pick a bunch of visionaries, because you're never going to get anything done. Like you
Right.
have to, okay, so tell us about your take on building these collaborative groups.
Well, there's two things that came up to my while you're asking that. First is I do talk about, like when I start talking about this in the book with how do you choose your team, I bring up the book The Human Fabric from the University of Texas by a man named Bejoy Wadsworth. And he breaks it down quickly into the mavens, the connectors, and the evangelists. And I tell the story about how one of my clients, we turned a little Bloody Mary gathering into Wisconsin's best Bloody Mary festival. And how you really have to analyze what type of people do you need, and they can't all be evangelists, they can't all be dreamers, they can't all be researchers. So looking at that, but also taking in other accounts of who's being served in this project. Do they represent who's being served? Is it a diverse and inclusive collection of people that like gears toward it? Is it there's so many other tools to use out there, Myers-Briggs, DISC, all those types of things that are tools to help you, but they're just tools. They're not necessarily what are going to dictate exactly what you should do.
Well,
Because, oh,
yeah, so let's just put a pin in that. I want to come back to Mavens, Connectors, Evangelists. My little Pilot G207, I think, did I get those three right? I don't know if I was writing fast enough.
you did.
Can you break those down for us? I think I know what those are, but I'm not totally sure. And, I'm asking for a friend. What does a Maven mean? What does a connector mean? What does an evangelist mean?
The Maven is the researcher, and we all know those people. Let's say you're going to buy a TV and you know the exact person who knows everything about TVs, and you're going to call them up because that's all every day they look at electronics, that those people. The evangelists are the ones that have the big dreams. They can usually get things started, but they need some assistance in the middle and the end. But they if you have a tiny idea and you bring it up to them, they're going to amplify it to the biggest change in the world, or the biggest idea. And then of course the connectors are the ones that can bring the useful tools and the useful people to the collaboration in, and they help to guide it to get to the end.
Right on. In our parlance, we would probably say that the Mavens are the organizers, that they have a lot of organizer energy. Like they know how to find stuff and they could become the subject matter experts. The connectors, we use the same language, right? These are that's a lot of collaboration energy, a lot of connection energy. And then the evangelists are the visionaries, like the ones who can, paint the big picture. Okay. So it sounds like you're talking about having those three kinds of people in a collaboration. Now, it is afternoon in Madison. Tell us about Bloody Mary Festival and how these three roles turned that into something that was so much bigger than you thought was possible.
Definitely. I do want to follow up that if I just use those because I like the simplification of it.
Yeah.
But if any of those other tools are useful to anyone creating intentional collaboration, go with what you know and what, especially like I write about how Myers-Briggs, if you have someone that can facilitate that and it's a larger group, that's also an amazing icebreaker, because you're really getting to know the team that well. Or that way. Well, in Wisconsin, we tend to sometimes drink. And so I was meeting two friends at the bar in a grocery store here in town. And they started talking about their Bloody Mary gathering, which they were calling a festival at the moment. And coincidentally, I was the connector there, and we had an evangelist and a maven that quickly could access the things that we needed to access to develop a quick informal plan on a bar napkin. So that little informal plan, then I brought back to my team, my team is on Project Kinect, is a pretty diverse team as well, with different talents and gifts and thoughts. And with that little plan, we evolved it into something that we thought was going to be big, but then you never know what the universe or what the people are going to react to it. And because of them, it became much bigger. And so then we had to realign as more and more people were buying tickets.
So how many tickets did you hope to sell at the beginning? And then how many did you end up selling?
That first year, we had a very smart goal of 500 tickets, and it went up to about 1,500.
Holy cow. How many Bloody Marys did you assume 500 people could drink? I'm asking for a friend.
Each person had about 8. So 8 times 1,500. So well over 10,000.
Right on. Okay. So, this is a real amount of vodka, and there are tomatoes everywhere. We're crying. So I asked Greg in the chat, you'll love this. So I asked, which people think that they are, do you think you're a maven, a connector, or an evangelist? And we've got a maven, we've got a couple people who are hybrids. I loved what Angie said about how it depends on the situation. I think that shows a lot of self-awareness. You can dial it up or dial it down depending on what's needed. Lynn Purdy says, I'm an evangelist. Peggy, I agree. I think if you are a city manager effectively for any amount of time, you have to be whatever the situation demands. Do you recommend, Greg, that when you pull these collaborative teams together, I'm thinking about your Bloody Mary Fest, do you talk with your collaborators about those three roles? I could see some value in saying first meeting, right? Do you think you're a maven, an evangelist, or a collaborator? Because we want to get you working on the part of the project that's going to like play to your natural abilities. Do you do that at the beginning of collaborations?
It depends. I also, there's a little bit to that question. I believe in intentional collaborations that we always should have an unbiased facilitator, and you can call that person whatever. So that person is the one that would be checking that. And sometimes it's necessary to bring up to the entire group of like, let's talk about who we are in this and what we bring to the table and what our strengths are and our personalities. But in many times, and this happens in our offices, this happens in group work, that there's never an opportunity to do that. So either we have to have the courage and the vulnerability to stop and talk about it, or we just, and I talk a lot about this doing our personal work, as we're working on what we can control, we also have to like sometimes acknowledge, it's useful to acknowledge like, oh, Susan is a maven, and I need to remember that when I'm approaching the next task or the next blah, blah, blah.
Right on. The other thing that occurs to me when you said that collaborations need an unbiased facilitator, I'm just thinking about like daily life. Like I'm in the middle of Govapalooza right now, which is this 5-day like Burning Man for local government nerds, and all online, of course. So everyone's in charge of their own fire protection. But I'm thinking about like at the local government level, when we're trying to do new pilot projects, the person who convenes the meeting, right? So if it's Gregg Potter saying, hey, you guys, I want to do something about diversity, equity, inclusion, let's get together and figure out like a pilot project that we could do that would make ours a more welcoming place to work, right? Like just as an example, is the person who convenes the meeting the person who should also be the unbiased facilitator? Because I think some people who can pull people together, speaking only for myself, aren't always great at running meetings.
Right. It depends. Every situation is different. I believe that if that person is able to, and they're not connected to any direct leg of the collaboration, that's fantastic. Then that's the role that they can take. But sometimes you don't have that person. And so in the ground rules, maybe you change who does that every week, every month, or however, or you go externally, and maybe someone internally is scheduling the meetings, but there's an external person that is advising the entire group and the person planning the meetings on this is what I hope we can do in this meeting.
Okay, so let's come back then to I mean, I know that in addition to assembling your team, you know, the connectors, the mavens, and the evangelists, you also talked about how important it is to have a map. And I wonder what you mean by a map. When you say map, I mean, I so often think about a roadmap as being the output of a process. You know, we're going to work together, and then at the end of it, we're going to have this plan. But you're talking about having a map earlier in the process. Is that right? Tell us about that.
I believe that, I mean, because in my process, there's a moment where I'm going to say this as reclaiming it for myself as my history, but it's a bust ass moment where you're not necessarily meeting with the group. So if you have a plan of how you're getting to the plan or the deliverable, that in the bust ass moment, every team member, every player has access to that map, and they all had an input in creating it. So there shouldn't be questions. They know to stick to what their task is until everyone reconvenes again to assess, update, and re-clarify what the next steps are. A map that also gets changed throughout the process.
So maybe to talk us through your process, because you said when you get to the bust ass phase of the process, that's when the map comes in handy. Could you maybe just outline for us in the Gregg Potter view of collaboration, what is step one, what is step two, et cetera?
I'll turn this on.
Definitely. The first is, of course, do I collaborate or do I do this myself? The assessing whether it is. Usually then once you...
Hey, Greg, I'm sorry, I had to mute you just briefly. So can you unmute yourself and start it at step one? Thank you.
Yes. So assessing whether or not you're going to collaborate. In that, you usually by then have one or two players or three players that you've spoke to that are already in cahoots with you on it, and you kind of do a skeleton of a map. That's also when you start creating what the possible roles will be, and you look at who's going to fill those roles. Once the once the entire group is together, roles are filled, and of course, roles might be added, or you might realize that I really don't need this role or this actor participating in this because it's not necessary. But when you have them all filled, then you update the map and you get everyone's input so the buy-ins there, and you look at what does the end look like and how do we get there. So that's ideally the map, and the end could be to creating a map for us or a strategic plan. It can be, whatever the deliverable is for the collaboration.
So I'm sorry, go ahead.
Once everyone is on that agreement with what the map is, and they know what their tasks are, or their first three tasks, then that goes into the first round of bust ass of like head to the pavement or feet to the pavement. I'm working on this. And when we come back together, whether it's in 2 days, in 2 months, I'm going to have A, B, and C ready to show. And we're going to talk about and get into a bunch of very intentional meetings to assess, are we still on course to the map? Does the map need to be reassessed? Or do we have to bring new people on? How does that look? And then it leads into another bust ass round.
Got it.
When you get to that end, then you start packaging up in a, the deliverable in a bow, and you hopefully do a little evaluation and measurement if it's needed in that type of deliverable. And you have it ready for that. If someone else needs to pick that up where you left off, it's ready for them to go. And all the other actors that aren't needed know that they're done, and they can use that energy for whatever is next in their lives.
Yeah. Okay. So the map is sort of a project plan, but it sounds like it also has people's initials in the major deliverables. Is that right? Or how am I thinking about this wrong?
It's the map. The map is just, it's explaining what people are doing when they're doing it, and how it contributes to the main deliverable. And I do want to, it's bust ass. Yes, Joanne.
Yep. Naomi, you got it right. Bust ass. So just work your face off is what I sometimes say. Okay. So assessive collaboration is the right thing to do. Step one. Step two, identify your team. Like, even if it's a skeleton team of who are the least number of people, or who are the minimum number of people we need to pull this off. Then those folks get together and start to talk about roles and who would do what and what this could possibly look like. It's the cocktail napkin thing that you sort of talked about a little bit. Then when you actually, it sounds to me like step three is when you actually pull together the whole group of folks that you want to recruit into this effort. That's when you start building the map, right? And then you go into round one of bust ass, which is everybody work their face off. I know in strategic doing, we talk a lot about setting 7-day goals, like doing the 7 and 7 meeting, so that your first meeting has a really tight turnaround time, so that you start building a cadence of accountability. You start, people can't procrastinate because we're going to be meeting again in 7 days. Do you have any guidance around, you've pulled off some amazing things in very short periods of time. And I wonder what the best practice is for how you get this new team quickly congealed, moving forward in that bust ass phase.
I actually bring up the 7 and 7 meeting in the book. I reference strategic doing quite often. I think there's two things though to keep people going. You've got the unbiased facilitator that is their communicator, like that they can check in with, and that will be the liaison for the entire group. But then there's also tools, out there, technology tools that can keep you going too. And I'm a big fan of the different tools, whether it's keeping a calendar together or using monday.com or however that looks.
Right on. Okay, very good. So it seems like at each one of these steps, you could just run off the road, but it sounds, when we started, we talked about the grocery store checkout line, this example of unintentional collaboration. And one of the beautiful things is like knowing when it's done. How do you wrap a project up, Gregg? How do you, because I'm just imagining at the end of Bloody Mary Festival, everybody was A, exhausted, B, possibly drunk, and C, was like high-fiving each other. And maybe the next thing you wanted to do was say, let's plan the next one for fall or like 4 months from now. I think it's a natural thing, like when we've been in a successful collaboration, to say, let's do it again. How do you decide when to end a collaboration, when to keep going, when to break up even? I don't know.
It's I I love all that, and it sounded like you maybe were at Bloody Mary Fest. um well, in the map, in the map should say, what does this look like when we're done? And I always love having that and going back to that, so there's accountability, but then also having a closing session that is a little bit more ceremonial and not necessarily a meeting wise, and ground rules in that closing session of, our closing session for Bloody Mary Fest was 3 days later. We met where we originally talked about this, and talked about what went well, did a little bit of the evaluation, and then just talked about the dreams of going forward. So then it was done, but the dreams could linger to maybe start a new process or a new collaboration. And what that ended up doing was we started doing bar crawls all over the state, but that's a whole nother story.
Right. That is a whole nother collaboration.
Yeah.
I really appreciate what you said about having a ritual as a closing ceremony. Like the example of, this is such a simple thing, but like going back to the same location where the idea was hatched. Because I do think in our work lives, we don't take the time to say, wow, that was great, or that really worked well, or we don't ritualize these endings, nor the beginnings, frankly. I mean, it's so much, we're so business oriented, right? We come in, we just go, go, go. But those little extra special touches, I think really means something for folks. Do you have other examples, Gregg, of rituals, either at the beginning or at the end of something, that help things feel like they're complete and they're like one whole thing?
Completely. Also, before I go into that, I do suggest that you put little celebrations and rituals into the map as well. That's very useful. And that's just, again, if you have a facilitator or a designated person, they can keep track of that. As you were asking me, Rebecca, I was thinking about graduate school, and at the Clinton School of Public Service, we had 3 main projects. And the first one was a group project called your practicum, which is very common in graduate studies. Our practicum was, I was with 3 other people, and we were in charge of doing a low income assessment of low income Arkansans and looking at what their needs were. So a needs assessment. And the ritual, the beginning ritual, really kind of started because it was a class with our entire cohort, and going off, and the beginning ritual was talking about ourselves, because we didn't have a facilitator. We all had to play the part at different times. And so you getting into knowing our group, I always think getting to know the team is a very important beginning ritual before you even start talking about where we're at. Even in any meeting, though, I believe it's a very powerful thing to know who's in the space. So for the practicum, because that was a 9-month project, when we finished and we had really big things to celebrate, we took it to an entire day of nature. Like the 4 of us, we went on a long hike, we went and had an outside lunch, and we talked about what's next for us individually and what we can do with the thing that we just did. Because that also helps realize that it is the end. Like, it's the end of this piece. We might work together again in the future, but right now, like, this is what we got out of it, and this is how I'm going to utilize that going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Peggy Maris says, call in context before content. That's exactly kind of what we're getting at here. I know for Futurist Camp, we have an opening bonfire. We did this remotely last year on the Thursday night before camp started. And just we asked everybody to come with a container carrying whatever it was they wanted to drink during the 75 minutes or so we had scheduled for this. We put up photos of bonfires, so we all felt like we were kind of at this Zoomified bonfire. And the way that we introduced ourselves was to share why we had brought that particular container. Oh my God, we howled, we cried. It was such a nice way of building community. And what has struck me about this Zoomy time is, even though it's weird, right? I mean, like, we can't hug, we can't shake hands. There's no holding each other's coffee cups in the coffee line, at a meeting. But I almost think because of that, people are straining even more to hear and to connect. I mean, just this question about what is he saying? Musk ask, what is he saying, right? I mean, it's like we really want that lean in, that human connection. So I can't say enough, Greg, about how inspired I think it is to think about the upfront ritual, the closing ritual, and then how you create those moments of context, as Peggy would say, in between.
As you were talking about Futures Camp, I do bring up the box ceremony that we would do every morning at Futures Camp, because I mean, Rebecca, you know this, and some of you might already know this. I am a huge believer of creating space. Like, that's my favorite thing to do in connecting, is creating space. And with every morning when we got started at Futures Camp, we would do a game or a icebreaker of box, but we can incorporate that into everything. And Priya Parker, who is my goddess with the art of gathering, she is a great reference to how do we do that, and how do we find unique ways to bring it in so everyone has humanity, especially in the moments when it's stressful and exhaustive and we are at the nails with each other in a collaboration.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm adding Priya Parker, The Art of Gathering is her book. Greg, I think you should probably explain what box is, because most people were not at camp and don't know.
Well, box is an exercise that you can do with a group. You can either have a box in the middle or just a space. But the group would stand in a circle and you're working off each other's energy. And so the leader, who can be self-designated or chosen by the group, starts just clapping and saying box, 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 and it goes quicker, and everyone in the group is going in it, box, 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 box. And as we're feeling each other's energies, someone inevitably jumps into the middle, jumps onto the box. And whatever the prompt is for that morning, then they share their answer to the prompt. And it's a moment of celebration for that individual. But also, my favorite part about box is that you are feeling each other's energies and you're getting into one space together, as opposed to individuals taking up individual spaces in that work.
Yeah, and Greg and I innovated this. We read Priya Parker's book. Greg was our camp director, Futures camp director, before camp became virtual, and it kind of made him redundant. Sorry, Greg, but that is what happened.
It is.
Yeah, once our camp director, always our camp director. But we were so inspired by Priya Parker's book, and we had read that there was a producer in Hollywood who was known for having very tightly knit casts, which is not normal. There are reasons that actors have trailers, right? They go off on their own, and then they get called to the set during the time. And this particular producer did this box ritual at the beginning of every day in a way to just allow people to sort of clear any emotional space that they had, or whatever it was. So, a prompt might be on a, Friday morning at camp is, what was the most campy thing you've done since you got to camp? And then we start box, 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 box. And then, people jump in the circle, they say their thing, we keep chanting box until it seems to be done. And then whomever the designated starting person was ends it. And it's given us all a chance to kind of see what's going on. But that is a camp ritual. It fit perfectly with camp. It's like something you would have done at camp as a kid. But I think it did contribute to people's sense of like, oh, wow, that's what Gregg's going through today. Or, woo, I did not realize Rebecca, that landed so hard for Rebecca. It just gives you a greater sensitivity to each other. I want to just give our participants a heads up that you can add your questions to the chat if you'd like. And also today, if you'd like to raise your hand and take yourself off mute and ask a question of Gregg and collaborate. I want to ask you one other question. Gregg, coming back to this map, the map sounds like what I was taught on Gantt charts: goals, activities, needs, and timelines, and so the map sounds like a much cuter version of sort of a Gantt chart to get us to whatever our next check-in or milestone is. I love that it creates accountability. But I wonder, like, when you're thinking about your project, how do you know, you said like you're going to think that some roles need to be filled and some roles might not need to be filled. When do you just kill a role as soon as it seems like it's not needed? And then who breaks it to that person? Like, hey, Rebecca, we thought you were going to be really valuable, but it turns out, wah, wah. Like, how does that happen? Oops, unmute.
Sorry. Usually from my experience, it's very organic. It's that both parties, both actors kind of know like, oh, I've already finished this. There's some sort of completion. There's some sort of feeling that like I've finished everything that we can do in that space. And that person, that actor, that organization has contributed. And now there's just, a moment. And I think it's very group wise because creating the map, I love to get creative. And often with clients, I will bring in crayons. I will, we'll get like, how do individually you look at this? And now let's bring this together and create it. So it's the same idea of having to ask someone or let someone know, like, I think we're done with you at this moment. It's a group conversation because it shouldn't be like firing someone because, I celebrate your gifts. I celebrate your talents. And you deserve to know if you have that option, that capacity, that space to go do work on something else now.
We have a question from Daniel. He had his hand up.
Yes.
Daniel, go ahead, hit it, man.
So I'm thinking about a work team, so not with a client, not kind of strangers coming together. We all know each other pretty well. And so I'm a small business owner and I'm supposed to wear 1,000 hats, right? Many of you can probably relate to that. I'm curious how you get people on a team that has worked together multiple times on different projects to, maybe this comes down to the role question. I'm not articulating very well. Where I'm getting stuck is I definitely am the visionary evangelist person, and I'm not a project manager. But sometimes I'm supposed to lead projects with a client because maybe I initiated it. There's a relationship, pre-existing relationship. How do I step out of the way and make space for my team? How do I, should I be really trying to become a better project manager? Because it doesn't feel like it's the highest and best use of my time. But if I am the project manager, my team's like, Daniel, this is stressful when you're the project manager. How do you help somebody in my position, and I don't even like this word, delegate, and be like, okay, well, here's the team. This is my role, but my role needs to disappear because I helped get things started. I helped ideate, bring me back when you need that again. But I really want to start the things and then let my team, who's smarter than me, like go run them. Yet I also have some ego, so sometimes it's hard for me to let go. So maybe that's where a ritual could help. Like, Daniel, thank you, you're good, get out of here.
You articulated that pretty well. It was jam-packed with a lot. I'm gonna first start with this sense of self. I'm gonna go back to that. No, the fact that you know what you're good at and know what you know, like someone else should be doing. I mean, as an entrepreneur, my dream every day is like, okay, what did I do that I don't like doing or I'm not that good at that eventually I'm going to have someone do for me. So that sense of self, and and I love that you brought up the idea of like groups that are already working together. How does that, how do we incorporate the ritual? How do we, separate and compartmentalize the different things? I believe a stop, and reset is always a beautiful thing. Whether it's a group that's starting a new project that's been working together for 20 years, or you're in the middle of 5 different projects and saying, at this moment for the next 2 hours, we're doing this. This is the bylaws to this. This is the strategic plan. This is the map, and that's what we're going for. And even if that project manager changes from meeting to meeting or time to time, as long as that the designations are there and you're holding yourself accountable to what the intended goal is of that project. Does that help?
It helps some. I packed a lot in there, so I've got some more work to do on my end, but I appreciate the context. Yeah.
I think the vulnerability that you have to know that I'm not a project manager, I think that is worth its weight in gold, because you will have someone that is a better project manager around, and if not, you'll be on an eye to find that person while you still have to be the project manager.
Right, and that's where we are. I still have to perform a role I'm not very good at, which causes stress that I don't want to be causing.
Yeah.
While we need to find a way to fill that role. Yeah. Okay.
If I could chime in on this just a little bit as well, Daniel, as an entrepreneur, I can feel you, because I'm not good at all of it either. And I mean, what's absolutely true, I think, for all of us. So we had asked you guys, like, are you a maven? Are you an evangelist? What are you? And some of you said, I can do them all, but some of them require more of our effort. Like when I have to organize something, I procrastinate, and then I feel a lot of pressure to do it. And I usually do an okay job, but it was not pain-free for me. And it certainly wasn't pain-free for the others who maybe were waiting for it or were delayed. And I think that pain can be a good teacher. It certainly has been for me. And maybe, Daniel, like, to continue with that pain until the pain is so great that you either break through and you create a different relationship with whatever the project management is, or you realize, like, I can't keep doing this. It's causing too much suffering for people. I do think pain is a great teacher. Suffering is a great teacher. There are also some things that I do to prime myself for those kinds of tasks that I am not naturally keen to do. So this might sound like really stupid, but it is based in science. So if you have to do a project management is organization. It's also working with others, right? So let's take organization. When I have to do an organization task, one of the things I do is I listen to classical music, because there's a dun, 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 a very, like, I especially listen to like the Brandenburg Concerto or any kind of Bach harpsichord music. I know I'm like nerding out, but there's something about that steady pace that just helps me prime to do that work. It feels like a box. And that's what I have to do usually, is fill out a whole bunch of boxes. And then if I've got to collaborate with others, that's easier for me. But sometimes I'm tired and I don't love it. And that's where, like, music that like really makes you sway, like I really am getting down to Lizzo these days when I got to like show up for stuff, right? Or it's overplayed but happy, right? That's another one that like you can't help but like rock back and forth, because that rocking energy is associated with collaborativeness. So I know, nerd alert, but those are things that do help me. Anyway. Other questions for Gregg, you can raise your hand using the reaction buttons. You can take yourself off mute. I think I can probably recognize anybody who takes himself off mute. Gregg, what haven't you talked about yet that you're like, if you really want to understand collaboration, you also have to know about this?
I think talking about the pitfalls a little bit is because there is, I would just want to go back to what Daniel was talking about. Like there is a gray area between an unintentional collaboration of me going to the grocery store and something that's starting from fresh start with a brand new people to what's happening, in a workplace or on a committee, on a board. So I just want to re-acknowledge that that's valuable, and knowing yourself. So the first thing with the pitfalls is uh, any work that you can continue to do on yourself is so important. I'm so grateful for my therapist and my friends. Like, so that having that in your back pocket and knowing yourself will keep you from some of these pitfalls. The first one I want to bring up is, and I guarantee we've all been in this moment, as a friend collector, I'm in this at least once a week of, oh my gosh, I love you so much, we should work on something. Right there is a huge red flag. Just saying that we should work on something is not the direction of a collaboration that you want to go. The need should always be dictating who you work with and who you bring to the table. And just because there's a likability, and this goes back to bias basics, there's a likability does not mean that there's actual credibility there. And the perfect example of that is I could go onto a construction site and be very gay, my very gay self, and I could be the best construction worker or the contractor ever, but I might not get the job because the likability is there. Other way, I go into an office, same person, they want me right away because they want the gay man at the group to plan the events for the office, but I wrote my resume in crayon. So, and I get hired. So there's the pitfall of, I love you so much, we should work on something. That's a big one. And going back to knowing yourself will always help with that. And then the second one, because I think that is the biggest pitfall, second way to work around that is going back to the need. What is the need? And how can you hold yourself accountable to making sure the right people are there to work on that need?
Yeah, and I'm sure that going back to that question, what's the need, probably helps a ton with scope creep, because sometimes these projects kind of like take on a mind of their own. If you're in a client environment, you don't want to say no to the client, so you say yes, and then all of a sudden you're like, why are we doing all of this? Like, how much of this actually has anything to do with the actual original need? So these aren't probably just things that happen once or twice, but might be things that you come back to again and again and again. Gregg, I can't let you go without asking you the question of your experience in Africa. You talked about this in the teaser, in the trailer to your book, about moving cattle through Africa?
Zebras.
Moving zebras through Africa. Gregg, here's the question. What did moving zebras through Africa teach you about collaboration?
Well, I bring it up right away in the book of assessing whether you're going to collaborate or not. And I think this actually goes back to Daniel's question. What happened one morning, I was at my friend Jenny's house, and we work on some grassroots organization stuff in Northern South Africa. And she's also a really good friend. And so it was not uncommon for her to just come in my room and be like, I've got something else for us to do. And it was, she had bought some zebras to move from one farm to her farm. And we quickly
What do people do with zebras?
A lot of people just have zebras on their land. Zebras, giraffes, different buck.
Grazing? Like, is there a utility?
Yeah, just grazing, not for hunting, it's just that they keep the population going. And
thank you for educating me.
You're welcome. And she wanted to grow her zebra population. So we got in the car and we are now there. And when we arrived, the veterinarian had darted the 3 zebras, and there was 5 people to carry these zebras. And right there, the collaboration, the need. These zebras need to get picked up, put into the horse trailer, and then, and the 5 of them were not going to be able to do it. So we all had to jump in. So the need was, we need this. The task was, we need as many able bodies who can carry something to help out. So those were the roles that were put into place. And then at the end, there was a celebration of all us on top of the horse trailer watching the zebras get woken up by the veterinarian and like go out into the, so that I bring that up just because collaborations look different in every different situation.
I think it's safe to say you're the only person on this call who's ever seen zebras. You said it so easily, like they got darted. I think you mean tranquilized with a dart gun. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
And then how were these zebras? I'm just curious. How were they actually transported? Like nobody grabbed their hoofs, right? Like, did you roll them onto tarps and like each grab an end of a tarp?
Yes, they were. I love that we're talking about this. They were put on tarps, and then we all had the tarp, but specifically 3 people have to be on the head and the neck so it doesn't wobble because it's so heavy. It was, yeah, it was
I think
a moment that I was shocked that I was even in. Like, I'm doing this right now.
right, you are. You're helping move zebras. Okay, this is a case study in collaboration, everybody. Greg, I don't see any other questions in the chat. I want to encourage everybody to buy Gregg's book. If you pre-buy, you get your name in the book, which is cool. We're so happy to have had you here. Gregg, is there anything else, if we asked you to enter the plug zone, is there anything else besides your new book, Gregg Potter, You Fool, that you want to encourage people to check out about you?
I'm going to quick answer Angie's question, 800 to 1,200 pounds. I'm open to questions and anything at any time. So always feel free. My handles on all social medias are GG Potter, and I respond to almost everyone in the timely manner that I can. And I just invite everyone to really explore the moments that you're not calling collaboration. And I know that the next time you're in a grocery store checkout line, you're going to think about, you're going to really. So that's why I brought up this. All stemmed from a workshop that I was asked to do for a conference that I sit on the board for. And it was just the last minute thing. I'm like, let's talk about collaboration, and I'm going to use this. And now it's turned into this book and this process. So, oh
man, Gregg, thank you so much. I can't wait to get the book. Maybe we'll have you back on when the book comes out, because then people can have read it and ask their questions. But we're going to start, of course, with the one about how much does a zebra weigh. Thanks everybody for being with us. If you're following the Futures Friday schedule, you probably have realized we are off next week, May 12th. We will be back on May 19th with a live signals panel with my panel that I meet with every week, where we are listening for weak signals that especially affect local government. So we'll be back for that on the 19th. And also on the 26th, brand new announcement. We haven't even posted this yet, but on the 26th, Futures Friday, we'll focus on red teams, the importance of red teaming to how you do your planning, how you think about the future. So there are 2 books out about red teams. We're going to be talking about how it looks live when you're doing planning. So it's wonderful to be with you. Gregg, you are an amazing human. Thank you for spreading your goodness and light over this group today.
Thank you for having me, Rebecca. Oh, and so nice to see all your faces and names.